No one saw her, but everyone had something to say about her. Until one day, everything changed. Subscribe and write in the comments. Where are you watching this video from? Layla woke before the sun every morning. The light that filtered through the small window of her room was barely enough to get a sense of the world outside. She didn't need much to get by. It was the same every day, making the bed, preparing the breakfast, and getting ready for another long day of service at the Graham family estate. She had been working there for years, and the tasks had become automatic. Her clothes were worn, patched in places, but they were as clean as she could manage with the little she had. Her hands were rough and calloused, evidence of years of scrubbing floors and cleaning dishes. Despite all of this, Layla never complained. She wasn't the type to ask for pity or sympathy, and in her world, there was no place for either. Her job, her life, both were sacrifices she made to survive. But there was something else that weighed on Layla, something heavier than the tasks she did every day. Her mother, once a proud woman full of life, was growing weaker by the day. The illness had taken its toll. She had stopped being the woman who once sang while she worked. Now Layla could barely get a smile from her. Every day, Layla tried to stretch the few coins she earned as far as possible, buying medicine that only seemed to offer temporary relief. But she wasn't stupid. She knew there was no cure for her mother's illness, not in the way she hoped. And so she woke early, not for herself, but to care for her mother and to do what she could for the family that barely acknowledged her. The Grahams had given her a place in their house, but it was not truly a place. She was the maid, the servant, the one who did everything for them and received nothing in return but the illusion of belonging. One morning, as Layla went about her work in the kitchen, she overheard the family talking. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Graham was saying. "We need to hire another servant, someone to handle the smaller chores." "I'm tired of Layla's clumsy mistakes." The words stung, but Layla remained quiet as she always did. There was nothing she could say. Her worth was measured in how well she cleaned the house, how well she cooked their meals, how invisible she could make herself. Later that day, as Layla swept the front porch, she saw him again, the old man who sat by the market gate every day. He had been there for as long as she could remember, holding a walking stick, wearing dark glasses and begging for spare change. His bowl was always empty, as it was every day, and the children in the market loved to throw stones at him. They called him names, useless, blind fool, things Layla had learned to ignore. But she couldn't ignore him today. Walking over to him, Layla took out the small piece of bread she had wrapped in her apron and placed it gently in his bowl. "It's not much," she said quietly, "but it's better than nothing." The man didn't speak. He simply lowered his head and nodded in appreciation. Layla felt a small pang of connection. She had nothing to give, but for a moment, giving this man something felt like the right thing to do. She turned to walk back to the estate when she heard a voice behind her. "Don't waste your time on him," someone sneered. It was a woman from the market who had seen Layla's actions. "You can't even feed yourself properly and you're giving food to beggars?" She laughed and the others joined in. Layla's heart tightened, but she kept walking. She had heard these kinds of comments before. They didn't faze her. Still, the words hurt, as they always did. She kept her head down, focused on getting back to the work that awaited her in the house. That evening, after the work was done and her mother had gone to sleep, Layla sat in the quiet of her small room. She thought about the blind man and the words that had been spoken. She thought about her mother and the life that seemed to be slipping through her fingers with each passing day. And she thought about the future. What would happen to her once her mother was gone? Would she remain invisible? Would she always be just the maid, the servant? The next morning, as Layla prepared to leave for work, her aunt arrived at the house. Auntie Rufi was known in the village for her sharp tongue and cold demeanor. She was the one who ran the family affairs, and Layla had always tried to avoid her. But today, Auntie Rufi had come to speak with her. "Layla," she said, her voice sharp, "you're always near that beggar. Why waste your time with him? You should be thinking about your future, not feeding those who will never give you anything in return." Layla's heart sank. She couldn't explain why she felt drawn to the man, but she knew she couldn't change what she had done. Still, she kept her voice steady. "He's hungry, Auntie. I couldn't just ignore him." Auntie Rufy scoffed. You think kindness will save you? Your mother is sick, and you're wasting time and food on strangers. You should be looking for a way to survive. You're not a charity case. Layla bit back her tears. She had heard these words before, and yet they stung more now than they ever had. Auntie Rufy turned on her heels, leaving Layla standing in the hallway, her heart heavy with words she couldn't bear to hear. That night, as Layla sat beside her mother's bed, she made a promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to take care of her mother, even if it meant sacrificing her own dignity. And she would never stop being kind, no matter how cruel the world had become. But little did she know, her world was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. A blind man, a broken promise, and a choice that would tear her apart were all waiting for her. And in the end, Layla would learn that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop being invisible. Her story was just beginning. When everything seemed lost, Layla would make a decision that no one saw coming, and it would change everything. The days passed, and with each one, Layla's burden grew heavier. The words of Auntie Rufy echoed in her ears, and the constant whispers in the market only added to her exhaustion. Her mother's condition worsened, but Layla kept working, scrubbing floors, cooking meals, and looking after a family that never truly saw her. She did everything with a quiet strength, even as her heart broke a little more each day. But no matter how much she worked, no matter how many sacrifices she made, the Graham's world never included her. She was just the maid, the one who cleaned up after them, the one who served them without question. The family never appreciated her, never saw her as more than a tool for their comfort. Layla had accepted this. After all, what else could she do? One afternoon, as Layla worked in the garden, she overheard a conversation between Mr. Graham and his wife, Mrs. Graham. They were standing in the grand foyer, their voices muffled through the open window. "She's becoming a burden," Mrs. Graham said, her voice tight. "I don't know how much longer we can keep her around." Mr. Graham sighed. "She's been here for years. It's hard to let her go, but we can't keep paying her wages if she's not going to be of use to us anymore." Layla froze, her hands still on the rake. She felt a sharp pang in her chest, a mix of betrayal and sadness. They didn't even see her as a person. To them, she was just a cost, a necessary evil. That night after dinner, Layla overheard Mrs. Graham talking to her husband again. "She's not getting any younger," Mrs. Graham said. "Soon she won't be able to work as hard as she does now. We'll have to find someone else." Layla's heart sank. She had always known that she wasn't really a part of their world, but hearing those words spoken out loud, so casually, made it all too real. She wasn't even a person to them. She was just someone who worked for them, someone they could replace when they felt like it. But it wasn't just the Graham's indifference that wore Layla down. It was also the judgment from the rest of the village. Every time she walked through the market, the whispers followed her. "Look at that girl feeding beggars when she can barely feed herself," someone would mutter. "Her mother's dying, and she's wasting food on strangers." Layla tried to ignore them. She had to. She didn't have the luxury of being bothered by people's words. But sometimes it felt like the weight of their judgment was too much to bear. One day, as she passed the market gate, she saw the blind man again. He was sitting in his usual spot, his head bowed, his hand outstretched, waiting for any kindness that might come his way. Layla hesitated for a moment, then walked over to him, as she had done so many times before. She placed a piece of bread in his bowl, just a small offering. But it was something. But this time, as she turned to walk away, something was different. The man's hand reached out, not in the uncertain way it had always done, but with purpose, as though he knew exactly where to find the bread. Layla stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding. She turned to look at him. "Are you really blind?" she asked, her voice shaking. The man smiled faintly, the hint of a knowing look in his eyes. "Does it matter?" Layla was taken aback. Why pretend to be blind?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's expression softened, but there was something more in his eyes, something deeper than what Layla could understand. "Sometimes we must wear masks to find the truth," he said quietly. Layla stared at him, her mind racing. Who was he really? What was he hiding? But before she could ask another question, Auntie Rufy's voice rang out behind her, sharp and angry. Layla, what are you doing here again? Auntie Rufy's face was twisted with disdain, and her eyes were full of fury. I told you, stay away from that beggar. You have a job to do, not play charity worker. Layla turned, her heart heavy. I was just giving him some food, she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't care what you were doing, Auntie Rufy snapped. You're wasting time on someone who will never help you. You need to focus on your future, not waste your energy on people who won't even remember your name. Layla's shoulders slumped. Auntie Rufy's harsh words stung, but she didn't respond. There was nothing she could say that would change her aunt's mind. Auntie Rufy only cared about money and status, and in her eyes, Layla was nothing more than a burden. But as Layla walked back to the estate, her mind continued to race. The blind man's words kept echoing in her mind. Sometimes we must wear masks to find the truth. What did that mean? And who was he really? That night, Layla sat beside her mother's bed, the woman she had spent so much time caring for, and yet still couldn't seem to save. Her mother was fading, and there was nothing Layla could do to stop it. She had used all her money on medicine, but it had only bought temporary relief. Tears welled in Layla's eyes as she held her mother's frail hand. I'm sorry, Mama, she whispered. I can't fix this. I can't make things better. Her mother's lips twitched into a faint smile. You've already done more than enough, she murmured. Don't lose yourself in the struggle. Don't let this world change your heart. Layla wiped her tears away and squeezed her mother's hand. I'll find a way, she promised, even though she didn't know how. But deep down, Layla knew the world was against her. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't powerful, and she didn't have the luxury of being seen as anything other than what she was. The maid, the servant, the invisible girl in the corner. And that thought weighed heavily on her as she lay beside her mother, the silence of the room a constant reminder of how small and helpless she felt. It was in the silence that Layla finally made a choice. She would not be invisible anymore. No matter how hard it was, no matter the price, she would fight for herself, and she would not let the world define her. The change had begun. The moment Layla stepped into the unknown, she found the strength she didn't know she had, and the truth she wasn't ready for. The days following her mother's death passed in a blur. Layla's world had already been small, but now it felt like the walls had closed in even tighter. The grief of losing her mother was compounded by the growing resentment from Auntie Rufy and the constant whispers from the villagers. Auntie Rufy had never cared for her mother. She'd seen Layla's family as a means to an end, a way to climb higher in life. And now, with her mother gone, she was eager to sell Layla to the highest bidder. Chinara felt a weight on her shoulders every day, as if the earth itself was pushing down on her, crushing her spirit. Auntie Rufy's words stung. You will marry Chief Bako. It's the only way we'll survive. I don't care about your dignity. She could see her aunt's cold smile, the glint of satisfaction in her eyes. The thought of marrying the old man, who was barely a shadow of a man, filled Layla with disgust. She couldn't understand how Auntie Rufy could see her as nothing more than an object to be traded. She stood in the garden one evening, staring at the wilting flowers her mother had planted, and wondered if there was any way out. She had nothing left. No money, no family, no future. It was then that she saw him again, the blind man. He was sitting by the market gate as usual, holding out his hand for coins, his head tilted upward, as if listening to the world around him. Layla had not expected to find him there, but there he was, just as he had always been. Her eyes lingered on him for a moment before she walked over. Her legs felt heavy, and she almost didn't want to do it. But something inside her told her she had to. Are you really blind? She asked quietly. He tilted his head toward her, the faintest of smiles playing on his lips. Does it matter? He said again, the same words he had spoken to her before. But this time, Layla felt a strange sense of calm wash over her. There was something in his voice, something that made her feel like he knew more than he was letting on. Layla sat down beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. She just stared at the ground, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The pain in her chest, the anger at Auntie Rufy, the frustration with the world, it all felt too much to bear. What do you want from me? She asked after a long pause. Why are you doing this? Why are you sitting here pretending to be blind? The blind man's smile faded, and he looked at her with a sort of quiet understanding. I'm not pretending to be anything, he said. I'm just a man, living in a world full of lies. Layla's heart raced. Lies? What do you mean? He paused, then spoke softly. People don't want the truth, child. They want comfort. They want to believe what's easy, what's convenient. They want to pretend that everything is fine, that their lives are perfect, but they forget what it's like to struggle. They forget what it means to be real. Layla was silent, absorbing his words. Everything he said felt like a mirror reflecting her own thoughts. She had been living in a world of lies, a world where she was just a servant, a piece in a game that had never been hers to play. She had been silenced, ignored, and now with her mother gone, she was expected to do the same thing for someone else. But she didn't want to. She couldn't. I'm not a slave, she whispered, her voice breaking. I won't be sold like that. I won't let them take away everything I have left. The blind man reached out, his hand resting on hers. You're not alone in this, Layla, he said gently. You never have been. Layla looked at him, her eyes wide. How did he know her name? She hadn't told him. She had never told anyone. But somehow he knew. He had been watching her, watching the pain she had tried so hard to hide, and he knew what she was going through. He smiled, his face softening. I've been waiting for you to come to this point, he said. You've been living for others all your life, but now it's time for you to live for yourself. You have the power to change everything. Don't let anyone take that away from you. The words felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She had always been afraid to stand up for herself, afraid of what might happen if she did. But now she realized that the only thing holding her back was fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what might happen if she took control of her own life. For the first time in a long time, Layla felt hope stir in her chest. It was a small spark, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way out of this life. That night she lay awake in bed, the events of the day replaying in her mind. She could still hear the blind man's voice telling her she had the power to change everything. And for the first time, she believed it. The next morning she awoke early, before the sun had even risen. The world was still, quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Layla got out of bed, dressed quickly, and made her way to the market. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew she had to start somewhere. As she walked through the streets, the whispers followed her, but this time, they didn't bother her. She had a purpose now. She wasn't just walking through life anymore. She was walking towards something, toward her freedom, toward a future that was hers to shape. When she reached the market gate, she saw the blind man again, sitting in his usual spot. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked over to him and stood before him, her eyes steady. I'm not going to marry him, she said, her voice firm. I'm not going to let anyone control my life anymore. The blind man nodded slowly. Good, he said simply. You're ready. Layla smiled, the first genuine smile she had smiled in weeks. I'm ready. And with that, she turned and walked away. No longer bound by the chains of her past, no longer afraid of the future. She had taken the first step toward the life she had always wanted, the life where she would no longer be invisible, where she would be free. And she knew without a doubt that this was just the beginning. The moment she decided to walk away, everything changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. The market was busier than usual that day. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over the stalls. But for Lila, it all felt distant. She walked past the familiar faces, the same whispers in her ears, but today, they no longer mattered. She felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The moment she had decided to take control of her life, everything began to shift. Auntie Ruvy's words echoed in her mind, but this time they were weaker, less powerful. You'll come crawling back, she had sneered. But Layla wasn't the same person she had been yesterday. The realization settled in her chest like a quiet storm. She wasn't going to let anyone control her, not anymore. Layla reached the market gate where she had seen the blind man so many times. He was there again, as usual, sitting in his spot with his wooden stick, dark glasses hiding his eyes. But today he wasn't just a beggar to her. He was the man who had shown her something she had forgotten, kindness even when the world had none. He had given her the strength to stand up and say no, to fight for herself. She approached him slowly, her feet unsure at first, but each step felt more certain. When she reached him, she crouched down, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready," she said, her hands trembling with the weight of her decision. "I've made my choice." The blind man didn't respond immediately. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached out and placed his hand on hers, his grip firm. "You're ready," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying the depth of someone who had seen much of the world. Layla stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt a fire burning inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, she knew that she had the power to change her life. She wasn't just a girl destined to be sold to the highest bidder. She was a woman who could choose her own future. As she walked back to the village, she no longer felt the eyes of the villagers on her. The gossip, the whispers, they no longer had power over her. She had taken the first step, and nothing could stop her now. She walked straight into Auntie Rufi's house. The place that had once felt like a prison now felt empty, hollow. Auntie Rufi was there, sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed and her eyes sharp. "Where have you been?" she demanded, her voice cold. Layla didn't answer at first. She just stood there, staring at her aunt. The woman who had controlled her, manipulated her, made her believe she was nothing. But now Layla saw her for what she truly was, a bitter, broken woman who only knew how to use people for her own gain. "I'm not going to marry him," Layla said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. Auntie Rufi's face twisted with anger. "You're making a mistake, Layla," she spat. "This is your only chance. You'll regret this." "I won't regret it," Layla replied firmly. "I'd rather live with nothing than give up my dignity for your greed." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Auntie Rufi opened her mouth to say something, but Layla turned and walked out of the house. She wasn't going to let her aunt control her anymore. That night, Layla sat in her room, staring out the window at the stars. It felt like a new beginning. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She was free. No more would she be silenced. No more would she be invisible. The road ahead might be difficult, but she was ready to face it head on. In the morning, as the sun rose over the village, Layla gathered her things. She didn't have much, just a few belongings, a small bundle of clothes, and the determination to make a life for herself. She left the house without a word, stepping out into the world with nothing but hope and courage in her heart. The market was already bustling when she arrived. She walked past the stalls, her feet steady, her mind focused. The blind man was there again, but this time, he didn't sit still. He stood up and approached her, his eyes still hidden behind his dark glasses. But his presence was different. It was as if he knew what she had done, what she had chosen. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice deep and warm. "You've taken the first step. The rest will come." Layla smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I couldn't have done it without you." He nodded slowly, his hand resting on her shoulder. "The road ahead will be tough, but you're stronger than you know." Layla nodded, feeling the truth in his words. She wasn't sure where the road would lead, but she knew that she was no longer a prisoner of her circumstances. She was a woman with a future she would create for herself on her own terms. And so, with her heart full of hope, Layla stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had found the strength to choose her own path, and that was all that mattered. The decision she had made was irreversible, but little did she know, it would change everything. Layla stood at the edge of the village, the sounds of the market still ringing in her ears, but it felt like a distant hum now. She was no longer the girl who had been pushed around, who had lived under the shadow of her aunt's cruelty. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air, but it didn't crush her. It lifted her. Layla took a deep breath, looking up at the sky. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the world in soft shades of pink and orange. It felt symbolic somehow, like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. She had always lived under the illusion that survival meant compliance, that happiness was something other people got to experience, but not her. For years, she had accepted the harsh conditions of her life. She had been conditioned to believe that there was no other way, that she would always be dependent on someone else's kindness or lack of it. But no more. The decision to turn down Chief Baco's proposal was the hardest thing Layla had ever done. The money her aunt promised would have given them a more comfortable life. It would have helped her mother, who was still struggling, and maybe even provided some peace. But at what cost? Her dignity, her autonomy. No amount of money could make up for the loss of her soul. That night, Layla sat at the edge of her mother's bed, the soft glow of the oil lamp illuminating the room. Her mother was sleeping, but the lines of worry on her face never seemed to fade. Layla reached out, brushing her hand over her mother's thin fingers, and whispered, "I'm going to change things." "I promise," her mother stirred slightly, a weak smile pulling at the corners of her lips. "You always have a good heart, Layla," she whispered, barely audible. "Just don't let the world take that from you." The words stayed with Layla as she sat in the silence of the room, the weight of everything pressing down on her chest. It was true. Her heart had always been kind, always willing to give, even when it seemed like there was nothing left to give. But that kindness had been exploited for so long, used as a tool to control her, to make her feel indebted. She closed her eyes, taking another deep breath. "Not anymore," she promised herself. The next morning, when the sun rose and the village began to wake, Layla gathered her few belongings. She didn't know where she would go, but she knew she couldn't stay here. Not under the roof of someone who saw her as nothing more than a commodity. Her aunt's cold, indifferent face flashed in her mind, but she pushed it aside. She didn't need her approval. She didn't need anyone's approval. She took one last look around the small room that had been hers. The room where she had spent so many years in silence, in fear. She walked out, closing the door behind her, feeling an unexplainable sense of freedom. She was doing this on her own terms now, and that was the only thing that mattered. The path out of the village was dusty, the road winding between fields that stretched as far as the eye could see. Layla didn't know where it would lead, but she didn't care. The road ahead was hers to choose. As she walked, she felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, excitement, uncertainty, but beneath it all there was a quiet strength. For the first time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. Layla didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know if she would find the success or peace she longed for, or if the road would be even harder than the one she had just left behind. But she knew this: she had made the right choice. No matter what happened next, she would never regret it. As she reached the edge of the village, the sounds of the market faded completely. Layla looked back one last time, but she didn't feel sadness. She felt release. The village had been her home, but it had also been a cage. Now she was free. There was a rustling in the bushes beside her, and Layla turned, startled. It was the blind man again, the one she had helped so many times before. But now something was different. He wasn't sitting by the gate anymore. He stood before her, dressed in simple but elegant clothes, his dark glasses still obscuring his eyes, but there was a confidence in his posture that hadn't been there before. "You're leaving," he said, his voice soft but sure. Layla nodded, unsure of what to say. "Yes, I knew you would," he said with a faint smile. "You've been waiting for this moment your entire life." Layla blinked in surprise. "How did you know?" He reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "I've been watching, listening. People like you, people with hearts like yours, they always find a way to break free." Layla felt a lump form in her throat. She had never expected this man to say anything like that to her, and yet his words felt like a validation, a recognition of everything she had been fighting for. "You've always been more than you knew," he continued. "You just had to see it for yourself." Layla swallowed hard, tears stinging her eyes. She had never realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she had longed to hear someone else believe in her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he replied. "You've already done the hardest part. Now you just need to walk forward." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing softly behind him. Layla watched him disappear into the distance, the weight of his words settling deeply in her chest. She had always doubted herself, always felt like she was just a girl caught in the expectations of others. But now, for the first time, she truly believed that she could be more than that. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Layla walked on, her steps growing steadier with each passing moment. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was ready for it. She was ready to face whatever came next, because she knew that her strength was in her choices, in her ability to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. For the first time, Layla wasn't afraid, and she wasn't alone. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more, watch our next video to discover another powerful journey, and share this one with someone who needs to hear.